live in interesting times. Today's stories. The United Nations says a serious funding crisis threatens food aid to Palestinians. Lavrov says Iran nuclear deal is fragile after U.S. withdrawal. France confirms contested arms shipment to Saudi Arabia. Pompeo warns the United Kingdom over China network's role. The House Judiciary Committee debates over holding Barr in contempt. Sarah Sanders rejects Congress' demand for full Russia report. Church of Christ members commemorate the birth anniversary of beloved messenger Brother Felix Y. Manalo. Hello everyone, I'm Anna Kui, bringing you stories from around the globe. And this is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. The UN warned Wednesday that its agencies providing food assistance to Gaza must raise tens of millions of dollars within weeks to avoid significant aid cuts. The UN's World Food Program and its Agency for Palestinian Refugees, or UNRWA, currently provide food assistance to more than 1 million people in Gaza. But the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for the Palestinian Territories, Jamie McGoldrick, warned that the agencies were facing a serious funding crisis. They needed to raise money fast to be able to make a looming order for the food needed for the remainder of the year, he told journalists in Geneva.
Unfortunately, we had 29 people killed in Gaza and over 200 injured, and 4 Israeli citizens were killed as well, around 200 injuries. We don't know the details of all the injuries, but that's the sort of the number. We would envisage if WFP and UNRWA don't get around $40 million by the end of May, beginning of June, they will not be able to order the pipeline, because you have to order the pipeline well in advance, and then there'll be a problem with the food supply to populations in the second half of the year.
UNRWA is planning to host a donors conference next month and another one in September as it struggles to fill the void after Washington, traditionally its largest donor, withdrew its support. Last year, a number of countries stepped up to generously compensate for the lacking U.S. funding, but McGoldrick said that this year a huge shortfall remained. He said if they don't get the funding, clearly they can't order the food, adding that this would mean that in the second half of the year, either the number of people receiving aid will be cut or rations will be slashed, or both. McGoldrick said in Gaza, where unemployment stands at 54% and is much higher for young people, people do not have the purchasing power to fill in the gaps. Describing the situation as very, very serious, he said, there is no alternative. It is not only the UN agencies providing food aid who are facing a shortfall.
That said, I think that we also face a serious funding crisis. We right now, of the humanitarian response plan that goes out every year, we ask for $350 million, and we're only around 14% funded, and we're almost halfway through the year.
There is something happening in terms of donor support to the Palestinian situation, which we have to better understand. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif on Wednesday called on European signatories to abide by the Iran nuclear deal following a meeting in Moscow. Zarif's visit came as Tehran said it had stopped respecting limits on its nuclear activities agreed under the deal until other signatories find a way to bypass renewed U.S. sanctions.
СВПД – это очень сложная конструкция. Она создавалась не один месяц, даже, по-моему, больше года. И в ней все предельно сбалансировано в этой конструкции. Поэтому, когда американцы вышли из этой договоренности, она стала весьма и весьма хрупкой. К сожалению, пока некоторые наши европейские коллеги пытаются в разговорах о ситуации вокруг Ирана выдвигать идеи, которые не имеют ничего общего с совместным всеобъемлющим планом действий и которые напоминают попытку отвлечь внимание от неспособности наших европейских партнеров полностью выполнять совместный всеобъемлющий план действий.
Lavrov said European signatories of the deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, were trying to divert attention from their inability to implement points of the agreement. Lavrov said European mechanisms to allow banking transactions with Iran despite U.S. sanctions were inefficient. He said, quote, "For Iran, it is important that this mechanism allows for the export of Iranian oil. We support the Iranians. This is a legal requirement and part of the JCPOA." Zarif, meanwhile, said, quote, "Our friends in Russia and China maintain very good relations with us this year since the U.S. withdrawal. But the rest of the JCPOA participants did not meet any of their obligations," referring to Britain, France, and Germany. He said, yes, they issued good statements, but in practice, nothing happened. Lavrov also criticized Washington for sending aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf, suggesting a willingness to use force. Washington reimposed sanctions after it quit the agreement 1 year ago, dealing a severe blow to the Iranian economy. The French government confirmed Wednesday that a new shipment of weapons will head for Saudi Arabia, despite claims Riyadh is using the arms in the Yemen war. Defense Minister Florence Parly told BFM television the weapons would be loaded onto a Saudi cargo ship scheduled to arrive Wednesday in the French port of Le Havre.
Il y a un cargo saoudien qui est dans le port du Havre, qui va arriver dans le port du Havre. Est-ce qu'il va charger des armes françaises pour l'Arabie Saoudite?
Alors, il n'est pas arrivé encore dans le port du Havre.
Il va arriver.
Moi,
il vient d'Anvers, là.
Je ne suis pas en charge de la surveillance des cargaisons. C'est une autre administration qui est en charge de ça. Mais je me suis néanmoins renseignée pour pouvoir vous répondre, parce que je me doutais que cette question, vous allez me la poser. Donc, il y aura chargement d'armes en fonction et en application d'un contrat commercial qui a été passé il y a plusieurs années.
Donc, des armes seront chargées. Ben non,
des armes seront chargées.
She refused to identify the types of arms, but reiterated France's stance that they have been used only for defensive purposes by Saudi Arabia since it began its Yemen offensive in 2015. Parly said, as far as the French government is aware, we have no proof that the victims in Yemen are the result of the use of French weapons. Pressure has been mounting on the government after the investigative news site Disclose leaked a classified military note last month detailing the use of French tanks and artillery in the war against Houthi rebels. Disclose alleged the new shipment included 8 truck-mounted Caesar howitzers, though a government source told AFP this week that such cannons were not part of the delivery. Rights groups have accused Paris of being complicit in alleged war crimes against civilians in Yemen, where around 10,000 people have died and millions have been forced to the brink of starvation. Andrew Smith of the Campaign Against Arms Trade NGO said, "The Saudi regime is one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world and has inflicted a terrible humanitarian crisis on Yemen." He said, "The destruction would not have been possible without the complicity and support of arms-dealing governments." On Tuesday, all left-wing lawmakers exited parliament in protest after Genevieve Darrieussecq, Secretary of State for the Armed Forces, said there was no proof these weapons are being used against civilian populations. France, the world's third biggest arms exporter, counts Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as major clients and has resisted pressure to stop arms sales to the Gulf countries. It is marked contrast with Germany, which has suspended its weapon sales to Saudi Arabia since last October. Parly said Wednesday France has strategic interests in this part of the world, adding that the latest shipments were part of the long-term partnerships with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The United Nations says the Yemeni conflict is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with 3.3 million people displaced by the fighting and 24.1 million in need of aid. Coming up, Pompeo warns the United Kingdom over China network's role. The House Judiciary Committee debates over holding Barr in contempt. Sarah Sanders rejects Congress' demand for full Russia report. Eagle News, Washington, D.C. will be right back. Welcome back. You are watching Eagle News, Washington, D.C. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged Britain Wednesday to be cautious about China's role in its 5G network during a visit to London that also highlighted the old allies' differences on Iran. Following talks with Prime Minister Theresa May and Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, Pompeo also condemned, quote, disgusting politicians who backed Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro and urged European nations to take back captured Islamic State group fighters.
Ask yourself this. Would the Iron Lady be silent when China violates the sovereignty of nations through corruption and coercion? Would she have welcomed the Belt and Road Initiative without demanding absolute transparency and the highest standards? Would she allow China to control the Internet of the future? As a matter of Chinese law, the Chinese government can rightfully demand access to data flowing through Huawei and ZTE systems. Why would anyone grant such power to a regime that has already grossly violated cyberspace? President Trump is eager for a new free trade agreement that will take our #1 trade relationship to unlimited new heights. And I spoke with both Foreign Secretary Hunt and Prime Minister May about this morning. We've filed all the papers we can at this point, and we are ready to go. But we can't make progress on a new agreement until Brexit gets resolved. Godspeed and good luck. How it turns out is, of course, your sovereign choice, but whatever happens, you should know we will honor that decision. Look, our relationship has been amazing and strong before Brexit, and it will be strong after it. Ultimately, when all is settled, you'll be first in line for a new trade deal, not at the end of the queue.
In a joint press conference with Hunt, U.S. President Donald Trump's top diplomats said they had discussed at some length the importance of secure 5G networks. Pompeo said the United States has an obligation to ensure that places where we will operate, places where American information is, places where we have our national security is at risk, that they operate inside trusted networks, and that's what we'll do. The U.S. has banned government agencies from buying equipment from Chinese firm Huawei over fears Beijing could spy on communications and gain access to critical infrastructure. A leak from Britain's National Security Council last month suggested the government in London is planning a limited role for Huawei in its 5G network. But Hunt insisted no decision had been taken, adding that Britain would never take a decision that compromised our ability to share intelligence with its close allies. Pompeo urged Britain to be vigilant and vocal against a host of Chinese activities that undermine the sovereignty of all nations. Noting the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing's global infrastructure project, he said China peddles corrupt infrastructure deals in exchange for political influence. Its bribe-fueled debt trap diplomacy undermines good governance and threatens to suspend the free market economic model on which so many countries depend. Their talks also covered Iran, which said Wednesday it had stopped respecting limits on its nuclear activities agreed under a 2015 deal with major powers until they find a way to bypass renewed U.S. sanctions. The U.S. pulled out of the deal last year, but other signatories, including Britain, have tried to save the agreement with a trade mechanism meant to bypass reimposed U.S. sanctions. Pompeo said Tehran's announcement was intentionally ambiguous, and Washington would wait and see what actions it took. He added, there are provisions in the sanctions we put in place that allow humanitarian aid and certain products to get into the country. He added, when transactions move beyond that, we will evaluate, review it, and if appropriate, there will be sanctions against those who were involved in that transaction. Hunt says Iran's announcement was an unwelcome step and urged the country to stick to the deal. He said should Iran cease to observe its nuclear commitments, there would, of course, be consequences. Elsewhere, Pompeo pressed the need for countries involved in the international coalition against the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria to take back fighters and civilians captured or held in refugee camps there. He said, quote, we've rounded them up, they are now detained and they need to continue to be detained so they cannot present additional risk to anyone, anywhere in the world. The U.S. diplomat also had tough words for supporters of Venezuelan President Maduro following a question about British opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's criticism of outside intervention in the country. Pompeo said it is disgusting to see leaders, not only in the United Kingdom, but in the United States as well, who continue to support the murderous dictator Maduro. No leader from a country with Western democratic values ought to stand behind them. Members of the House Judiciary Committee debate over whether they should hold Attorney General Bill Barr in contempt for failing to provide an unredacted version of the Mueller report.
Today, we consider a report recommending that the House of Representatives hold Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress for defying a valid subpoena issued by this committee. This is not a step we take lightly. It is the culmination of nearly 3 months of requests, discussions, and negotiations with the Department of Justice for the complete unredacted report by Special Counsel Mueller. The President has stated that his administration will oppose all subpoenas, and in fact, virtually all document requests are going unsatisfied. Witnesses are refusing to show up at hearings. This is unprecedented. If allowed to go unchecked, this obstruction means the end of congressional oversight. As a co-equal branch of government, we should not and cannot allow this to continue, or we will not be a co-equal branch of government.
The committee, by making this insistence and issuing this subpoena, is telling the Attorney General of the United States to commit a crime, because it's a crime for anybody to disclose grand jury material to anybody else. That includes the Attorney General, it includes the prosecutors in the Justice Department.
But you can't be in contempt for failing to produce things that are illegal for you to produce.
Nobody's asking the Attorney General to disobey the law. We're asking the Attorney General to obey the law and produce the Mueller report and the supporting documentation, the underlying evidence that we've been requesting for a couple months now, and that the American people have been awaiting for 2 years. He says in his report, it was a sitting president under the rules I'm operating under. I couldn't file charges. That's why it's Congress's job to do something about it.
How can we impeach without getting the documents? So we must get this document. The American people expect us to do it.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders rejects demands by congressional Democrats to turn over an unredacted version of the special counsel's Russia report as unlawful, saying Chairman Nadler is again trying to violate the law.
Chairman Nadler is again trying to violate the law. The President and the Attorney General are the ones that are actually upholding it. And as long as Congress and this committee continue to ask the Attorney General to commit a crime, the President and the Attorney General will continue to actually uphold the law. And I make of that people don't understand the precedent that has been set. This is fully consistent with that precedent, and it's fully consistent with the President actually upholding the law. If anybody is overstepping, that would be Chairman Nadler and his committee.
When we come back, Church of Christ members commemorate the birth anniversary of beloved messenger, Brother Felix Y. Manalo. Eagle News, Washington, D.C. will return shortly. This is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. I'm Anna Clee. May 10th is the birth anniversary of Brother Felix Y. Manalo, the religious leader members of the Church of Christ believe as the messenger of God in these last days. How are they commemorating this day? Take a look.
May 10 is a very significant date for us members of the Church of Christ, because we are commemorating the birthday of the one whom we recognize as God's messenger in these last days, in the person of Brother Felix Y. Manalo. He played a very important role in this church to which we belong, the Church of Christ, or the Iglesia ni Cristo. Well, as God's messenger, he was instrumental in preaching the true words of God written in the Holy Scriptures, And as a result of that, the true Nation of God, Church of Christ, emerged in the Philippines in 1914. And this is the same church that reached the far west on July 27, 1968, as a fulfillment of another prophecy of God written in the Holy Scriptures. And we are glad that through God's help and guidance, this church is now global, can now be found in more than 150 countries all over the world. The entire church, or all members of the Church of Christ, are remembering the works, labors, and sacrifices of God's messenger in these last days. And at the same time, we are also reminded to put into practice the teachings of God He taught to the entire church, because this is the best way to fully secure our salvation. And in addition to that, we continue to uphold the important works He started, like the works in the field of edification and also in the work of propagation. We need to edify all members of the Church of Christ, especially during these tough times, to strengthen them so that even in the midst of trials and difficulties, they will remain true and faithful members of the Church of Christ. And in the field of propagation, we follow the lead of our executive minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, in intensifying our effort to propagate the true gospel, because we firmly believe, as attested to by God's words written in the Holy Scriptures, that this is already God's last word of salvation.
What I admire about Brother Felix Y. Manalo is his work ethic of spreading the gospel, and it reached so many people.
Knowing how much he labored for the church and how much persecutions he had to endure, he serves as an inspiration for me to remain strong and fight for my faith no matter what trials and tribulations I face in life. I admire his strong faith and perseverance. He fought for his faith, persevered, and with God's help, he was able to reestablish the church as prophesied in the Bible. And all of us are witnesses on how God's prophecies still continue to be fulfilled.
For me, Brother Felix Manalo provided a way for us to understand the truth. So without him, we would have not known about the true church, and so we're very grateful about his contribution to our faith.
The way I will commemorate Brother Felix Manalo's birth anniversary is by teaching the youth here in the church what he did to spread the words of God, and how they too can be like Brother Felix in propagating the words of God to everyone around us.
Personally, I commemorate Brother Felix Manalo's birthday by inviting my co-workers, my friends to attend our Bible missions.
And to commemorate his birthday, to remember him, is to share my faith to the whole wide world, because it's the least I can do.
And to commemorate him on his birth anniversary on May 10 is to help people all the more know of the words of God that he preached.
Brother Felix Y. Manalo for me is an inspiration, not only for me, but for all the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo in these last days.
And he is a role model for each and every one of us. And he is also a great leader and inspiration to every members inside the Holy Church by sharing our faith to non-members and being united with the church administration.
I would say his selflessness, because he put the needs of the brethren in terms of their spiritual well-being before his own. And it's really reflected that he had a genuine concern about how they were doing spiritually. And to me, that really stood out.
I commemorate his birth anniversary by participating in propagational activities of the church, such as sharing our faith.
Wala siyang tigil dahil ang natatandaan ko walang humpay ang kanyang, katulad din ng ka Eduardo na walang humpay ang pagpapalaganap ng salita ng Diyos kung saan-saan po.
He never gave up his faith. He held on to God's promises.
To me, Felix Y. Manalo will be a great role model. He inspires other people in different ways.
I'm going to participate, propagate, invite my friends and my relatives so that they can also know the teaching, true teaching, directly from the Bible.
In commemorating Brother Felix Y. Manalo, our God's messenger in these last days, we will be having an evangelical mission, and I'm planning to invite people and my friends, especially my colleague, in that event.
Nung dinodoktrinahan, isa po yan sa tanong ko, sino pa si kapatid na Felix Manalo? So hanggang sa natutunan ko po mga aral, napakahalaga po pala niya. Dahil kung hindi po sa kanya, hindi po magsisimula ang iglesia sa mga huling araw. So ganun po ang kaimportante ang kapatid na Felix Manalo sa akin.
Brother Felix Y. Manalo came from humble beginnings, in which he was able to use his determination and motivation in keeping up with his purpose and his intention for his church. And because of this mission, he was able to push forward despite the many persecutions that came his way. As a result of this, he served as an inspiration for those people who continue to work and continue his mission.
It's a wonderful anniversary every year because it sort of reinforces my belief in the Church of Christ, its teachings, its doctrines. And every time that month and that day comes around, it reminds me of how wonderful it is to belong to the genuine and one true church. There is no other. And without the work of Brother Felix Manalo, we wouldn't be here. It strengthens me every time even more. And it reminds me really how wonderful and how fortunate I am and my family that we are members of the Church of Christ.
Brother Felix Y. Manalo to me is the perfect example of a true member of the Church of Christ. He's a constant reminder that as a member of the true church that we should always be active, we should always follow God's teachings, and always be mindful that we have to be obedient unto the commandments of our Almighty God.
That is today's Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Join us tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at Eaglenews.PH and Eaglenewslive.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/EagleNewsPH. Thank you for watching. I'm Anna Kui, and I am 1 with 25.